Why do we need to understand this book called Dao Because, as one knows, China is a very culture that has something like 5,000 years of history, right? Otherwise, you could also say that it is at least 2,500 years old, because some of these books is written around 500 BC, right? In this period, it has been said that it's the axial period, because at the same time, on the other side, the Greek, philosopher like Socrates, Aristotle, all this group of people, Pythagoras, they are also during that period of 500 BC, 300 BC or so, right? So they call it the axial period. In fact, for 2,500 years, all that we have been able to conceive in philosophy, in thinking, in the way we look at things, all has to lead us back to that period of 500 BC. So to understand Chinese is to understand one of these very important books called the Ding, right? It's written by Lao Tzu. In the Chinese psychic, in fact, there are three things that we have to bear in mind how it has impact or influenced the Chinese. The important one, other than the Jing, is also the Confucianism, Kongzi, text by Kongzi, which also influenced a lot of people. And they are also disciples like Mezi, Hen, and many others who are the disciple of the Confucius. But Lao Tzu is slightly different. He wrote the book because he used to be a guardian of a library. So he read many books in the library, the so-called the emperor's library or the ruler's library. And then he decided one day that he wants to go into the wilderness, leave the courts, So as he was riding his cow, he has to pass through the gate. So at the gate, his best friend say, since you have read so much, why don't you write something for me and before you leave? So he wrote this Jing, and that's how we learn about this Jing. And then he rode his, buffalo or cow into the wilderness. And legend has it that he rode it, not like facing the cow head, but allowing the cow to wander as the cow wants to go, because he turned his body, facing the backside of the cow. So the cow is the one that leads him where he wants to go. So this is a very interesting image that many artists will paint. Because why? Because cow is nature itself, right? So if you allow nature to overtake whatever it wants to do, it seems to be what they are propagating, the way to go. The way is to allow nature to lead the way. The way is to flow with nature. The way is to have adventure. The way is go to places that you do not know where you are going. So it's kind of different, to many philosophy. Many philosophy wants you to know exactly where you want to go. You set a target and you work towards it. But not Taoism. Taoism propagate another form, adventure. The unknown is where you want to be, It's not the known that you want to go. Because the moment you know already, the moment you can do it already, it's not a way to repeat it, because there's no more excitement, there's no more surprises, there's no more invention, there's no more creativity. So that's how Jing, or this book called Jing, its philosophy has been practiced by many people, especially the artists, the literati, the people. In fact, it's also a book to advise the ruler. Wow. And it's actually, in a very strange way, is totally opposed to what Confucianism is propagating, right? A certain strict formality, a certain strict ritual for Confucianism, whereas for Jing, it proposed that you let the nature take the way, and do not need to speak too much, and do not need to teach your people too much, right? Important thing is to make sure that they have enough food and they are strong, they are vital, right? They has vitality, So that's the main thing that the Taoists will propagate. That means make yourself to be a better person is the way to go. Right? Of course, to be a better person there is also a debate, regarding the Taoist form and the Confucianist form, or Kongzi way, So whatever it is, Kongzi and Laozi seems to be born around the same time, but of course legend has it that Laozi close to very old and he's at least 500 years old. So kind of strange, but that's the legend. But the most important is not about understanding the history, but it's to understanding the idea that's written in the book, and how can we use this idea to lead a life that we want to lead, So they are quite opposing form, right? And then of course the other thing that one wants to understand is Buddhism, right? Buddhism is also flourishing in China, right? So these three forms, the Tao, Kongzi, and Buddhism, they all mix up the everyday life and the culture and the norms of the Chinese people or China. So to understand China is also to understand all this intricacy of all this ideology. And usually these are not religious books, but they are teachings. So in Chinese the word is called jiao, right? So teaching is important, and they do not differentiate much about the two opposing forms. In fact, in Chinese, the opposing form is also the same form. That means if you want to have right, you must have left. If you want to high, you must have low. So they are the same thing. So that's how the Chinese would look at it. So to understand China, to understand Chinese, is to understand all these three different separate teachings. And it is from here that we can learn about the Chinese. And if we can understand Chinese, if we can understand them, or you can understand us, then you can live harmoniously together. And the other thing is that the Tao philosophy is also a philosophy that can accept differences. Just like I say, if there is yin, there must be yang. So if there's hard, there would be soft. So these are all opposing forms. So because of the ability to put this opposing form, to see them as singular, therefore there is a propensity, a tolerance to accept a lot of differences, right? To allow them to exist side by side. So I think that's why in China you have not a singular form, but you have many varied philosophy and teaching, and they are all good for the people, the development of people, developing of their character, developing of their soul, developing of their ability, right? Because there's always this famous word in Chinese, 海纳百川. The ocean will be able to contain all the river and stream and the gorges and the water that flows from everywhere, and they will flow to the ocean, and the ocean is a melting pot. So the differences is before they flow to the river. So they flow to the river and then they flow into the sea. So the differences is different river, but they all contain water that has to eventually flow to the sea. So that's where you get one huge melting pot, and that's where people can see differences, and yet they can see that all can exist in the singularity, in a harmonious form. So that's how we should be reading some of these Chinese texts, and we should understand them in order to understand China and Chinese. Right, so that's my take on why we should understand 道德经